Hey folks, welcome back. In this video, I want to talk about the wheels for Midnight Panic. Now, as you can see, there's already a lot of fabrication that has been done here, and here I am starting a video halfway through this process. As a matter of fact, it's well over halfway through the process. The fabrication portion of, rebuilding these wheels is basically done. I initially skipped, doing basically this intro and a little bit of video work and just jumped right into working on these wheels. My initial goal was to take one set of 5 days off, get started on these wheels, and hopefully have them into powder coat before I had to return back to work. So basically, I just jumped right in the middle of working on the project. All I did was set up the camera, put it on time lapse, and did a whole bunch of time lapse video, to get this project started. The biggest reason for time lapse is simply all of it is repetitive work. So, I had to start out with dismounting tires. You have to dismount 4 tires. Then you have to cut the centers out. You have to cut the centers out of 4 rims. Then you have to cut new centers, 4 of those. Everything is just 4 at a time, with the exception of these gussets, which there was 24 of those. Time lapse was simply the easiest way to do that. And it was easier for me to get started on the project and just get a lot of work done very quickly. Now, before we get into what I actually did on these wheels, I kind of want to recap on where I started with the whole tire and wheel project. Several videos ago, when I talked about converting Midnight Panic from a mega truck into a monster truck, I had mentioned that one of the key components to having a monster truck is 66-inch tires and how I had acquired those. I had actually traded a set of 54-inch Mickey Thompsons on aluminum wheels that did not fit any of my stuff to a friend of mine that had a good set of 66-inch 10-ply Goodyears on the correct wheels. Now, once I got those wheels from that friend of mine, I got those wheels, tires and wheels here. I had them dismounted, and I took a really good look at those wheels that I had gotten in that trade. Now, the wheels were really good quality, and they had put a lot of work into putting the centers in those wheels. But the centers that were in those particular wheels were not the correct bolt pattern for my Pettibone planetaries. They were actually set up for a 10-lug, like a regular over-the-road truck or a 5-ton military axle. So I was going to have to cut the centers out of those wheels and put my own Pettibone centers in there. The wheels themselves, all the fabrication and the work that had gone into those was, really good quality. And it kind of felt to me like a shame to chop those wheels up. So initially, as soon as I got the tires and the wheels dismounted, separated from each other, I posted those wheels up looking for someone to trade. I was just looking for someone that might need that particular wheel with that bolt pattern, say for a ride truck or an old school truck running 5-ton axles, something along those lines. It just seemed like a shame to chop those wheels up. Well, I had them basically on Facebook Marketplace for, several months. Had a few people interested in buying them, but to me, I couldn't sell them. Then I have to just buy all new wheels or all new components. I'm not really in a position in this project to do that. After several months of those wheels being on Marketplace and not really getting anything trade-wise, as I got closer to the project here just a few months ago, I decided to go ahead and get Pettibone centers cut out for those wheels, planning on going ahead and cutting them and using them. So I had the local water jet guy, I drew up the pattern and had him cut these wheel centers out of 1/2-inch plate. I did the machine work to put the correct chamfer on here so that the lug nuts would work correctly. And they are set up to fit in those wheels. Those particular wheels, they're 25-inch diameter to fit the inside diameter of the tire, but they're what you call a drop center. So once a few inches from the bead, they go back and they drop in. So there's a drop center wheel, and it drops down to a 20-inch inside diameter. So I have these centers, and they're set up for a 20-inch wheel in the drop center. So here I've got my centers, I've got the wheels, and I'm actually ready to, I'm planning in the next couple of weeks to get to cutting and make these wheels the way I need them. And about a week before I had, this is what I'm gonna do. I went ahead and put the wheels on Marketplace again, offered them for trade again, Lo and behold, there was a guy semi-local, 100 miles down the road, that had a set of 25-inch wheels, and he needed a set for his ride truck. So the wheels that I had were actually perfect for his application. And like I said, they're a really good wheel. The fabrication on them was great. So, we kind of got together, exchanged pictures, checked stuff out. Not only were those wheels perfect for his application, there was a bit of a perk for this whole swap for me as well, besides having somewhat of a clean slate to work with wheel-wise. These particular wheels that he had, they were mounted up in a set of 66-inch Michelin radial tires that had a really nice wear pattern. So the 10-ply Goodyears that I had that came on the wheels that I was looking to trade, they are what they call stripers. So they had kind of a funny wear. As they get out towards the middle of the tread bar, they get kind of a cup, or they wear the center of that wear bar down. They call them stripers. They work fine, but they're just they look a little bit goofy. Well, the Michelins that were on these wheels have a nice, even, flat wear pattern. They're a little bit heavier because they are a steel belted radial, but they were a really nice, clean tire. Now, the guy that I was working the deal out with, he was willing to trade tire and wheel for tire and wheel. So what we ended up doing was I give him my wheels and 4 of my 10-ply Goodyears for these wheels and the radial Michelins. So that's how I ended up with this stuff. Now, these particular wheels here, I think there's a little bit of history behind them. I don't know all of the history. These are really lightweight wheels. And this flange here is actually where the 2 halves of the wheels bolt together. Kind of like an old 3-wheeler wheel. Back in the 80s, when they made 3-wheelers, you would dismount your tires by splitting the wheels in half, and then you could put those 2 halves of the wheels back inside of the tire. Well, that's how these wheels here are set up as well. The wheels that I had, you actually had to bar that bead over the bead of the tire over the bead of the wheel, and that was the reason it was a drop center. So these are a split rim, or 2 halves of a rim, bolt together halves, and this flange here is not welded to the drum. It is actually rolled into shape somehow. Someone built a machine to build basically a dedicated competitive monster truck wheel. And that is what this set of wheels are. I don't know how old they are. They're a little bit beat. And there was a couple parts of them, the outer halves on 2 of the wheels were pretty egg-shaped. We took care of that. I'll show you more on that here in a little bit. But all in all, I would like to know more history on the wheel because they're pretty cool. They are obviously built for competition use. Now, the centers that were in these wheels, when I got them, were set up for a Clark lug pattern. That's obviously still is not going to work for me, but they were a really thin, like 1/4-inch wheel flange. It was welded at the back bead of the wheel, so they had a ton of offset. And then they had an 1/8-inch plate gusset that was rolled like a cone. So it welded here, and it went back into the wheel center, and it went full diameter of both the drum of the wheel and the wheel mount flange. Now, the way they were set up and the way it was done, and over years of abuse, I'm sure, you could see where that gusset had been cracked from that wheel flange multiple times. They'd been patched up, welded up. They were pretty rough. They were in pretty bad shape. So it didn't hurt my feelings at all to chop these things up and get them repaired and, make them back into a nice wheel. Now, before I could really start any work, I had to get these things out of those tires. And that proved to be a really big project, actually. Now, you would think you don't have to bar them off of the tire, so it shouldn't be that big a deal. There's 46 bolts that go around this flange right here. The outer half of your wheel that would stick out here, that's how the 2 halves bolt together. So I actually had to take some adapters out of the wheels, unbolt the 2 halves of the wheels, and then pull those each half out of the center of that tire. The problem I run into, I would flip the tire down on its back and then use my crane here in the shop to lift that wheel up out of the tire. What would happen though was when I would pull on that wheel, it would actually cause the bead of the tire to roll up, and the bead is not just a thin bead, right? It comes out and it drops down about 1.5 inches, 2 inches. So as pulling up on the tire, it would do like this Chinese finger cuff thing where it would actually grab harder on that wheel. I could use my 4-way, pick up on that wheel, and pick the whole tire up off the ground, and it wouldn't even loosen, it wouldn't budge in the tire at all. So on average, the first 3 wheels that I dismounted, it took me 4 hours a piece to get these things apart. Of course, by the 4th one, I kind of had figured out a technique and had it pretty well ironed out. I was able to bust that tire and wheel down in about an hour and a half. Needless to say, that took a very long evening after work and pretty much all of the next day to get all of that stuff dismounted, my mess cleaned up, and now I'm ready to work on the wheels. I will say that after working on that stuff for that many hours, a good solid day, at 46 years old, I felt like I was in pretty good shape. Then on my second days off, I was feeling that first day's worth of work. But I still had to get stuff done, and the next part of the project was actually chopping these wheels apart. Again, that turned into, actually being quite a big project. I started by plasma cutting the Clark center out from one side, and then flipped the wheel over and cut that cone-shaped gusset out. And then on 3 of the wheels, I actually had to split that whole assembly into about 3 parts so that I could fish it out of that wheel. Once I had the bulk of the material out of my way, I actually had to go back with the plasma cutter again and kind of trim up a lot of that mess. There's a lot of weld, a lot of material still left in the wheel, and I had to get it down to the point to where I could go in there with a stone on a grinder, knock the vast majority of that junk out of there, and then go back with a flat disc and clean it up, make something that I could start working with. This whole process again took a little bit over a day, about the same amount of time as the tires. So I had all of a day plus part of the next morning, getting all of the center material out, and I ended up with 4 drums that were usable and ready to turn them into wheels again. Now, a little bit of the downside, as I had mentioned with my centers that I already had cut out, these were set up for drop center wheels. So they're 20-inch outside diameter, and they're not going to work for my new drums. These wheels here are 25-inch diameter to fit in the tire, and they are 25-inch diameter all the way across from bead to bead. There's no drop center. So inside of this drum, or the inside of this wheel, is actually works out to 24 3/4 diameter. So I went down to Dad's house and cut these out on the plasma cutter. And it actually, we had her dialed in pretty good. It cut these things out super nice. On this particular set here, I decided to use 3/8 plate, and there's a couple reasons for that. One, the wheels are designed to be lightweight. They started out to be lightweight. If I take and cut centers out of 1/2-inch plate and weld them in there and do no gussets, you're going to end up just probably tearing this wheel off of the center eventually. These wheels are actually made out of 1/8-inch plate. That's how lightweight they are. And if you go welding a 1/2-inch or an 1/8-inch plate, rolled plate drum onto a 1/2-inch center and have no intentions of using gussets, eventually you're going to run into the same problem that these wheels originally had. Everything kind of flexing around, it's just going to start cracking out and busting loose. So right off the bat, I knew I wanted to put real gussets in there, not a rolled in cone or anything weird. I wanted to reach out here and get a hold of as much material as I could with these gussets. So I decided to do 3/8 plate centers, and these gussets are actually press broke 3-dimensional 1/8-inch plate gussets. Now it took a little bit of time. I basically started out with a piece of cardboard and built the prototype. It was done out of cardboard. We call that CAD, cardboard aided design. I took that particular piece. Once it was proven that it would fit in the wheels here, I drew them up in plasma cam, and I went down and drug a couple pieces of scrap 1/8-inch out of Dad's pile of 1/8-inch stuff that he cuts, signs and decorative stuff out of. And I just cut 24 of these things. Actually, let me rephrase that. I started out, I cut out one. I cut one gusset out, come back up here to the shop, put it in my press brake, and I bent it. And basically I put it in the press brake and I bent it as far as the press brake would go. Run the press itself down to about 15 ton, and then I come out and I test fit that one gusset in the wheel that I had on the table. And all that was doing was proving that that thing would work. Yes, the cardboard piece fit nice, and I just needed to make sure before I go cut 24 of these parts out that they were in fact going to fit and work. They did, everything worked good. I went back down there and I cut the rest of these gussets out, brought them up here to the shop, cleaned them up, and run every one of them through the press brake in the same fashion. I just run every one through, pressed it down at 15 ton. That's where it stops. It's bent in the press brake, in the foot of the press brake really well. And by the end of the day, I had 24 gussets ready to weld into these wheels. Now, before any welding went on, I had set up some spacers about 9 inches long, and they were set up so that I could put these wheels face down on the fab table here and space the new centers back off of these wheels, back off of this flange here, 9 inches. And that gave me about 5 inches of back space here on the back. So the back bead of the wheel will be off, offset back in from the wheel mounting flange on the planetary 5 inches. Now, the truck's going to end up pretty wide with that shallow back spacing. A lot of pettibone guys go anywhere from like 6 to 10 inches of back spacing, but I want to start out fairly wide and make sure that everything is cleared. I don't want my tires, rolling into my shocks or getting into the chassis. I want to have lots of clearance on the link bars. And this is not going to be my last set of wheels. I'm pretty sure that the truck is going to end up with new wheels down the road. So I want to make sure these fit and clear, and this will give me a good idea, what I want later in the next set. I have been around a handful of trucks that run this same offset on pettibones, and they work well. So I do know they will work. There's just some guys out there that think maybe it's going to end up a little wide. I'm willing to risk that at this point. Now back to setting the centers off of this flange. The reason I did that is, like I said, these wheels are used, they're a little beat, and the back bead on them, they've seen some damage, they've seen some use. So I didn't want to base everything off of a bead that could be a little tweaked or bent or crooked. These flanges here are nice and straight and flat. So I set them up on the table and based the center, getting it true and square off of this flange right here. So later on, when we get this truck going, if you see me ripping across the field and the tires are all doing wibbly wobbly stuff, at least you know this part here is running true with the centers. Once these were set up on the table, I tacked them in place. I did all 4 of them. And then I set them up here on these rollers so that I could work my way around to each part and weld them out kind of in segments. I did have to get in here and do a lot of grinding, a lot of flat disc actually, removing paint. You can't weld through the paint. I didn't think it was worth the effort to have them sandblasted and then do the work. I just went ahead and marked where each gusset went, ground the paint off where the gusset was. I had already removed the paint before tacking the center in where that area is. So once everything was cleaned up and in place, I set these up in the rollers and welded this outside, the full diameter around this wheel mounting flange. Once the outside was done, I went in and tacked each gusset in place. I just kind of worked my way around, welding each gusset in kind of in a symmetrical pattern. I would weld this edge here on this gusset, come over and weld this side on this gusset, and then I would roll it and do the same with 2 other gussets. Eventually you work your way around and all these edges on the gussets are welded in. I was actually working both of my welding machines to do this project. I had my 230 Hobart set up, dialed in. It was working awesome for welding these 3/8 centers into the drums. By the time you got that whole center welded in on the front side, the fan on that machine was screaming. So then I would switch over to my miller, and then I would actually weld the gussets in with the miller. Once I was done with the gussets on the front side, I would flip the wheel around, go back to the Hobart, and weld the back side of the flange in. So everything in here is, you know, pretty well 100% welded in, nothing stitched in. It's all welded 100%. It's really kind of crazy to think. I know there's a lot of weld in here, but there's like a full day invested in welding these things together. For all 4 wheels, I have a full day invested in that. Just a lot of welding, a lot of cleanup, but they're all done now. There was a couple of beads that I had to mess with that were kind of dented and beat up. I got those straightened up. And then, like I said, a couple of the outer pieces, 2 of the wheels had outer portions that were kind of egg-shaped. They had just taken hits throughout their life. They weren't quite round anymore. So what I did was I actually built a tool that fit on my porta-power ram, and then I used the porta-power pump to operate the ram. I had it hanging from the hoist here in the shop, and I just worked my way around and straightened that egg-shaped rim back into a, you know, more round shape. They're not perfect by any means, but they're far sight better than they were when I got them. And this pretty much brings me to where I am right now. I'm actually getting ready to load these up in the back of the pickup, haul them into town, and we're gonna have these powder coated. The biggest reason for powder coat is it's just a good opportunity to have them sandblasted. Any rust or anything that's going on the inside of the wheel, we can kill that rust and put a good protective coating on it so they will easily last the rest of their life until I destroy them or somebody else gets the opportunity to run these wheels for a while. And I am pretty much at the limit of the amount of time I want to talk to this camera. So I'm going to load these things up and head for town. Figured I'd show you guys how the fit up worked out on these gussets here. Pretty happy with how that all worked out. You can also see how nice a job the plasma cam did cutting these centers out. And obviously the lug stud holes were chamfered, machined, so the lug nuts fit properly as well. Turned out pretty nice for a set of old wheels and some new parts. I will get back on here when I actually have something to report or when I get these things back from powder coat. My goal with this video is 1 video for the wheels. I don't want to do a multi-part series on wheels like I did the engines or the injection. They're just wheels. There's nothing that technical about them. We'll just do 1 video and be done with it. So I'll bring it back in a little bit. Well, the wheels have been delivered to powder coat, so any progress on that project is kind of out of my hands right now. Any other projects with any fabrication is also kind of on hold because the plasma cam table is down for some updates. I've got 1 more day off before I go back to work tomorrow, and I thought I would use this time to do more wheels. This is a video about wheels after all. The wheels I'm talking about right now are actually the wheels for transport tires. So obviously I cannot load that truck up in the trailer with 66-inch tires. I can't even get close to loading that truck up with the 52-inch R2s that are on the truck. It barely fits with transport tires. Now, the super convenient thing about Midnight Panic and the buggy running the same axles is I could have 1 set of transport tires for loading those 2 vehicles in the trailer. Unfortunately, now that Midnight Panic is going to have a Pettibone hybrid, my transport tires are no longer going to fit that truck. So clearly what I'm going to have to do is build another set of transport tires and wheels, or that combination. Now, a guy could always scab something together to get that truck in and out of the trailer. But me personally, I'm a really big fan of a nice set of transport tires. That's why I build all brand new stuff for the buggy and the Midnight Panic for the trailer to start with. So I'm just going to do it again. I went ahead and ordered up another set of 750/20 R1s. Cute little guys. They're just under 35 inches tall, if I remember right. And when I notched the back of the trailer for that extra bit of width to get those rigs in there. I only made that notch 3 foot tall, so 36 inches. Any bigger tire just simply won't fit in the trailer through the doorway. Now, these particular tires here, as I said, they're a 750/20, so they use a 20-inch rim. And you would think that getting a bare 20-inch shell would be really easy. 20 inches is a super common size. I would think it would be easy to get, you know, a 6, 7, 8-inch rim with no center in it, very cheap. However, that just doesn't seem to be the case. There's a few people that carry a bare, bare drum or a non-centered rim, but the price on them plus the shipping is really just crazy for what you're getting. I have found that you can jump on eBay and buy like a stock replacement 20-inch steel wheel for about 120 bucks and free shipping. I'm good with that price. It does come with a little extra work. I have to get this center out of here so that I can have this drum, this bare rim or this shell. To do that on this particular set, I'm gonna have to cut all of these welds out of here. There's about 8 stitch welds that holds this center in. Now on the first set that I built for the buggy, I basically just connected the dots. I just cut from hole to hole with the plasma cutter, kind of buffed them up a little bit with the zip disc, or not a zip disc, a flat disc, and then simply welded a 1/4 inch plate center in here. And it's kind of looks like hand holes in it. So I only had to stitch in about, 5 4-inch long welds. Plenty enough, to get the thing in and out of the trailer. These ones here, however, I have to cut the entire center out because this rim shell with no center in it actually barely clears the hub on that Pettibone Planetary. Now, getting these centers out of this shell is not really a fun job. The quickest, easiest way to do it is just throw a zip disc on the 4-inch grinder and get busy. The less I talk about doing it and the more I start doing it, the quicker it's gonna get done. So that's where I'm headed. Well, here's the first one with the center knocked out of it. Once you get past the grinding dust and the filings going down your neck, it's really not a terrible job. All I gotta do now is knock out the other 3.
Bro, I'm straight up not having a good time.
I got a text while I was at work today. My wheels are powder coated and ready for pickup. So I'm on my way home from work now. I'm gonna swing by and see if Allison wants to jump in, run into town and grab these wheels so I can get them back out to the shop. And we'll see what we got when I get them back home. I've got one of these wheels unloaded here in the shop. As you can see on the outer half of the wheel here, we use the main accent color that I've used throughout the truck, and that is kind of this gunmetal gray color. On the inner half of the wheel, this is Super Chrome by Prismic Powders, and that is the main color of the entire chassis. Now, we'd actually considered using a blue color on this half of the wheel so that when you look in through the outer half, you would see blue back in there. And that was just kind of to go with the blue that is on the bed sides on the exterior of the truck. Ultimately, we kind of thought that might just be too much blue on this truck. And it was actually Allison's suggestion to go with the Super Chrome on the inside of the wheel. And I think that's gonna make a really nice looking combination. So now all I have to do is roll the tires up on the apron, get them all pressure washed and cleaned up, get them in the shop, and get to wrestling these wheels into the center of the tires, get everything sealed up, bolted together, and hopefully when I'm all done, they'll hold air. It looks like the last time these tires were used was at a mud bog somewhere. So I rolled them up on the apron, used the pressure washer in a little simple green, got them all cleaned up good, scrubbed on the beads, so hopefully those will seal up nice. And now it's time to get to wrestling with these things. Get them mounted back up. And after all that, here's the finished product. I'm really happy with how this whole combination turned out, and I'm glad that this part of the project is complete. Now I can move on to getting the axle housings done, so I can eventually get those things put under the truck and bolt these tires on. For those of you that are curious about the transport wheels, I buttoned those up today. I went down and cut 16 of these little tabs out so that I can use 4 studs per corner to put these tires and wheels on when it's getting loaded to transport in the trailer. I also had to modify the valve stem hole here because the tire that's going on this wheel is a tube type tire. So I had to modify the valve stem hole a bit so that the valve stem of the tube would fit. And even though I didn't get them all mounted up, I did get one tire installed on the transport wheels so that I could make sure this combination was going to work. Now that I know that this is all going to work out, Friday after work, I can get the other 3 mounted and have those ready for when the housings are complete. I can bolt these little guys on and use those to move those axles around and get them underneath the truck when that time comes. I'm pretty certain that the next shop video is actually going to be axle housing related because I'm getting ready to jump into that project head first and get those things done. That should be a pretty big, interesting video. So keep an eye out for that. As far as this video goes, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up because I'm pretty much done with tires and wheels. As always, thanks for watching. Have a good one.
Okay, you gotta turn it now. Gotta turn? More. Turn more, Mom. More?